Hello friends, and a very warm welcome to Living Well Regardless, a program aimed at expanding our awareness of how to maintain a sense of well-being and meaning in our lives despite the pain and suffering that will inevitably come our way from time to time. I'm Dr. Stephen Hughes, and I'm your host, and this is the third episode in what will prove to be an open-ended series of discussion topics related to living well regardless. Living well regardless will provide you with some thought-provoking ideas, interviews with people who are well despite. Hello friends, and a very warm welcome to Living Well Regardless, a program aimed at expanding our awareness of how to maintain a sense of well-being and meaning in our lives despite the pain and suffering that will inevitably come our way from time to time. I'm Dr. Stephen Hughes, and I'm your host, and this is the third episode in what will prove to be an open-ended series of discussion topics related to living well regardless. Living well regardless will provide you with some thought-provoking ideas, interviews with people who are well despite having experienced trauma, illness, relationship stress, financial and employment stress, and other forms of happiness disrupting experiences common in our society. This episode, I'm playing an interview I pre-recorded with a lady named Amy, who generously, that's not her name by the way, that's a pseudonym that I have allotted to her. She generously shared her story of growing up in an environment that fits the description of what is called adverse childhood experiences. Adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs for short, is the term used to describe all types of abuse, neglect and other potentially traumatic experiences that occur to people under the age of 18. Adverse childhood experiences have been linked to risky health behaviours, chronic health conditions, low life potential and early death. As the number of ACEs increases in one's life, so does the risk of these outcomes. The presence of ACEs, however, does not mean that a child will experience poor outcomes. However, a child's positive experiences or protective factors can prevent children from experiencing adversity and can protect against many of the negative health and life outcomes even after adversity has occurred. Now, adverse childhood experiences occur across a range of contexts in a person's life. So they occur at an individual level, at a family level, at a community level, and even at a society level. And they involve structural issues in society that have a negative impact on human development. Contexts such as poverty, the lack of access to necessary health services, including mental health services, the high levels of alcohol and other drug abuse that occur in society, and that in the case of alcohol, for instance, is actually sanctioned in society. These contexts, these social structures, actually have an impact on individuals, families and communities, and the broader society in general. So there's social contexts, so that the kinds of outcomes that we talk about from early adverse childhood experiences, those outcomes are not seen essentially in the context of the individual being broken or the individual having some kind of innate problem that is associated with genetics or chemical imbalances in the brain or some other kind of explanation that might be given for their problems. This is about looking at things from a sociological perspective rather than an individual Western psychology perspective or from a medical perspective. So that, in a way, by looking at the risk factors that occur in a person's life, early in a person's life, and looking at the absence of protective factors that might exist for that individual, there's I guess, an expectation that there may well be negative outcomes for that individual as they continue to develop. But not necessarily so, as we will see in the case of Amy. It's important to address the conditions that put children and families at risk of ACEs so that we can prevent ACEs before they happen. The Centre for Disease Control in the United States of America promotes lifelong health and well-being through its Essentials for Childhood initiative, and it offers strategies to assure safe, stable, nurturing relationships and environments for all. Of course, some traumatic events in a child's life are simply unpreventable. There are random events unconnected to one's particular life circumstances or community environments. Children fall out of trees or off bikes and they break bones. They fall ill with viral infections and they're hospitalised with a broad range of illnesses not related to environmental circumstances in particular. We might just consider it a matter of misfortune that a child is in a motor vehicle accident, or falls off a swing, or catches chickenpox and suffers complications. But where there are concomitant environmental factors, such as poor hygiene, lack of access to clean water, poor education services, lack of access to legal, health and social services, the chances of poor outcomes are magnified. Given this, there remains a burden of trauma on children that is linked to life circumstances that can be improved by government and community policy and action. Addressing structural issues in society such as poverty, access to public housing, local level quality and affordable health care services, inclusive education facilities with quality staff, community mental health promoting initiatives and related facilities, legislation to address the epidemic of gun violence in society in places like the United States of America. Provision of financial safety nets to support those who are unemployed or disabled or homeless. These are only some of a long list of public policy areas that need attention to reduce the incidence of adverse childhood experiences in any community. One potent risk factor for the optimum development of children is the mental health status of parents. Another is the presence of alcoholism or other drug abuse and dependence of family members and caregivers. The effect of this on communities is substantial and can have lifelong impacts on children exposed to the chaos of drug and alcohol dependent adults. The emotional and attachment disruptions to carer-child relationships in alcohol and drug affected families is serious and long-lasting. Attachment is a natural and necessary part of human development, and it helps to shape the neurobiological architecture of the brain in such a way as to help infants feel safe and secure as they go about experiencing the world. Attachment requires adults who can construct physically, psychologically, relationally and emotionally safe environments in which children develop. The infant who grows up in an environment where adults are inconsistent in their caring behaviour, where they are emotionally unavailable to their children, where they are abusing drugs and alcohol, and so their attention is largely focused on their addiction and how to get it satisfied, and where mental health is parlous and ill health untreated, is a serious risk of neglect, trauma, and of developmentally adverse conditions. Long term, the impacts of these adverse childhood experiences place the individual at risk of developing the very same problems that shaped them in the first place, and the problems become intergenerational. I'm just fascinated at the moment, as an example of these ACEs in practice. I'm fascinated that a society such an economically advanced society such as the United States of America can have the experience of having 19 children and 2 of their teachers murdered in a mass shooting in a state that allows people to buy and carry weapons that are capable of inflicting death and injury at a huge scale among the community, where those guns are available to people to purchase without any kinds of serious restrictions. And at the same time, this being the country where the Centre for Disease Control has identified ACEs as being a significant social and economic challenge for the country, not just at an individual level, but we're talking about community and society levels. So we've got this paradox where that particular country has identified the problems of ACEs and the long-lasting misery that can occur as a result of not addressing these ACEs, and yet at the same time have a social policy that allows gun violence to be absolutely out of control. It's an epidemic in that country. So I would consider children growing up in a community where gun violence was a common experience, I would see that as an adverse childhood experience, and one that had the potential to be severely traumatising for individuals growing up in those particular environments. So gun violence being an adverse childhood experience, and yet having a society that actually promotes and allows and nurtures even the ongoing production and take-up of weapons in the community. It's a contradiction that I just find very difficult to resolve in my mind. However, that's somewhat of a digression, I guess, but it is an example of something that is currently occurring in our world. So Amy, when we listen to her story, as you will in a moment, Amy tells a story with many dimensions of early adverse childhood experiences. Yet it's a hopeful story of resilience and the early development of an acute intuition that protected the young Amy in many risky situations. So let's have a listen to what Amy has to say about her life story. So I'm sitting with Amy today, and in the beautiful veranda in the backyard of Amy's house in Toowoomba. It's so green, and the jacaranda tree is just coming out in flower, and you can hear the birds around. It's very peaceful. It's a really lovely spot to be. Is this environment that you've got here, Amy, is this, does this make you feel good?
Yes, it does. It does. Even though it's not as neat as I would like. Mm-hmm. I do spend a lot of time out here. So this is somewhere where I'll play the guitar, or I'm learning to play the guitar or listen to music, and it is quite close to nature. I think that's one of the prerequisites for me, is that I need a house that every window I look out of is greenery. And initially when we first got the house, it didn't have anything. So I quickly got that sorted.
Wow, you've done a really good job. Do you find that you're the kind of person who needs to have a strong sense of place, somewhere to ground yourself, somewhere to feel, attached to the place, and somewhere where you feel like this is where I can come as a sanctuary?
Absolutely. Especially with the work that I do. I'm often seeking out green spaces. You could find me at any park in Toowoomba, in between jobs. But particularly, coming home is just such a, it's a place where I can just be. And I just chuck off my clothes, put my robe on, and I can just relax and, get that time that gets me grounded. I definitely feel very grounded when I'm here.
So, it sounds like you've, found a way of being in the world that has helped you to deal with some of the chaos that you've talked to me about that was your earlier experience of life. Yeah. Do you want to just, take us through a little bit of those earlier experiences, and what might have led to things being chaotic for you?
Okay, so I was born from a basically a rebound. My mother and father weren't together. My mum was a single working mum, and my memories of her were that she was a very good mum. She was very attentive. However, she took up with a sailor, and they had a little baby who I considered to be the greatest thing since sliced bread. Anyway, I wasn't to know, but Mum was not in a good place in her head. My brother died of cot death, and she didn't cope very well after that, and I guess back then they didn't really have the supports, and perhaps if she had sought some sort of help, she would have been perceived as being a little bit nutty. So, thank God things have changed from there. But in her trauma, she went to the fridge and took out some scotch, and she'd had some Valium prescribed to her as a result of her trauma, and she dropped dead on the spot. I was 5 at the time, and yes, that was a very interesting time, because I didn't know my father, and he was my only living relative alive, or father being the closest relative alive. So he sort of came into the picture, only he had a fair bit of baggage himself. He was an alcoholic and homeless, worked but kind of flitted from place to place, I think, until his welcome was worn out. So he insisted that he take care of me, and at first my grandparents on my mother's side were totally against that, because they could see there was no stability there. And I went over to live with my grandparents, and my cousin was there as well, and my auntie, who's a year older than me. So that was to form my sort of first or my second family. So I lived with my grandmother and grandfather, but my grandmother was an alcoholic, so she wasn't very much there for me in terms of her own addictions, but she did actually show me unconditional love, and I felt very loved during that phase of my life. However, my father decided that he was going to take me, and there was nothing they could do about it, and that was a bit unstable that time. I was sort of dragged from pillar to post, and into alcoholic situations where there would be grown men drinking and down and out, and it was quite a sort of a scary and confronting time. But I did develop some safety behaviours, and I managed to come through that fairly unscathed. But, I guess everyone's different, but for me it was, I did have a sense of, God early, and my relationship was very toxic. I was blaming God for all my problems, and that was to continue for that rebellion was to continue for a few years. But, growing up with that particular home life was very difficult for me, because I was, I was quite talented at things, and I just didn't progress anything. It just didn't come to pass. There were no sort of people in my corner. And then my nan sort of my dad's mum came over from New Zealand, and she just did an intervention and signed the custody. My dad signed the custody over to her in a pub, and I went over to live in New Zealand. And my nan, she was a very hard woman, and she was not easy to get along with, but I really loved her. And my grandfather. So I lived with them for a few years, and I just kind of checked out when I was about 14, 15, and just didn't really give a damn anymore. And it was at that time that I started to drink, and I just went on a very self-destructive path. In fact, I think I said to myself something like, if this is life, I don't want a part of it. I am going to kill myself, but I'm going to have fun at the same time. And so, yeah, that was that journey. Went for 10 years, and I got myself into a lot of scrapes.
So I'm just reflecting on some of the things that you've been telling me, Amy, and it seems to me that there's a bit of a pattern that's sort of developed in your early life. So, with the suicide of your mum and the cot death of your brother, and those two things sort of being very related, there's an enormous trauma there. So a disruption of attachment, and then a sense of being thrown onto your own resources. You were then placed into a really risky situation with your father, who would take you to these adult places that were really risky for children, especially female children, I would think. And then so there's a sense of chaos, and yet you were developing skills and surviving. And then this grandmother who you didn't know, who comes from another country and rescues you, only to find that you're placed into another risky situation.
Yes.
And you've got to dig even deeper into your own resources to try to survive. Can you tell us maybe a little bit about that point where being in New Zealand and being with your grandmother and her then getting sick, and then what happened there?
So she was her mental health. She had a mental health episode, and was placed in hospital, which left Pop and I at home. And he tried to come and jump into my bed, but I outwitted him and out-talked him and got out of the room. And this kind of situation was not unusual for me to be exposed to. I had quite a lot of resilience. I mean, I see now that I had quite a lot of resilience because I had known terror, and I know what that feels like, and it is terrifying to not be without resources and people in the right places and security and all the comforts of that brings. So for me it was a battle of survival, and it was a matter of having to make myself invisible at times, and I did very well doing that. And I wouldn't have any facial expressions. I was very deadpan. I really undersold myself. You
made yourself small?
I made myself small.
Small target.
Small target, and I won't be seen, you see. So that helped me a lot. And yeah, I guess I was very good at picking really tricky situations and having an exit plan, a safety plan to get out of it, and I knew that instinctively.
Do you still go into places now with a safety plan?
Yes, absolutely. Because when you grow up and people, parents, adults, seniors, people that are more grown up than you, you look at their behaviours, and what's really terrifying is that they actually can't support you, and you know that, and you think, well, I'm only a kid, what am I going to do? I don't know what to do here. But you do, you can, and I guess I was just a lucky one. I really was lucky. It could have turned out so differently.
So when then you've had this situation with your step granddad, because he wasn't.
No.
He
Yes.
wasn't,
Yes.
related, was he?
No.
You then used some more skills. You took some action.
Yes.
You made a decision.
I made a decision. that, and it wasn't only him. It was our next door neighbour as well, peering in the window at me as well. And I just knew I was in a very scary situation. And it was absolutely abhorrent to me to place myself any further in that situation. So I decided that the odds were against me. I initially thought I'd run away, but then I realised I didn't have any resources. I just couldn't. I wanted to run, but I just knew I couldn't stay wherever I got to. It just wasn't practical. So I decided that I was going to kill myself. And this was, the sum result of my childhood. It had all consolidated. I saw adults as people who could hurt me and who didn't support me. So, there really wasn't a lot of faith and hope for me. So that was the decision I took. And it was the best decision because I ended up coming to the attention of the authorities once I'd taken the pills. And, just to put it in perspective, they were old people's pills and it was some cooking wine. And I thought that was going to do it for me. And I know people have experiences where they wake up after they've tried to kill themselves and they're really happy. That wasn't the case for me. I actually felt, when I woke up, I thought, oh God, I haven't succeeded. I'm still alive. But as I said, the authorities came in. That was child protection, and I just told them what had happened. And I said, look, please don't tell my grandmother. It would kill her. Please spare her. So they were able to remove me from that situation and under my terms, on my terms.
And you were about 14 at this stage?
Yes. And so I was placed with the family in the location. It was a very country sort of area, so they did manage to place me with some people, but it was not a good fit. They were a young couple, they had a young family, and I was pre-teen and damaged, so to speak. They did their best, but it just didn't work, and they ended up contacting... oh, that's right, I started to smoke. That's when I started to smoke. And I was going completely haywire there. And they just didn't sign up for any of that. So I was then taken into care and removed to a town quite a fair distance from where I came from, and I was just so crushed. I just cried for the whole trip. I think it took 1.5 hours, 2 hours, and I was just I was broken. I was just I was done. I didn't know what to do. It was awful. And I think from that moment I just didn't grow up. I was just going down the wrong path. And yeah, I know that, I was quite an exceptional kid, but that wasn't the case during my teen years. I just couldn't connect with people. I felt so isolated and different. No one to talk to and confide in. I was just a sort of walking zombie, really, going through the motions.
And when did you first start to drink?
First started to drink on my 15th year. With some kids, we were well and truly underage, obviously, and I loved it. It just lit me up, and I just felt alive and confident and capable. And I thought if one drink makes me feel great, then two will make me feel even better. drank alcoholically initially, you know, from the very beginning. And, you know, I mean, I had form. I had the breeding. It was in the DNA. So, yeah, it kind of went slowly, my drinking progression, because I was in high school. But, you know, other things suffered, you know, my ability to form relationships, healthy relationships, to actually follow my dreams. You know, when I was 15, I was all about making movies, singing, you know, that was my life, and that was the path, and it just fell away. You know, I was getting merit certificates and awards for this and that, whatever I did, and yeah, I didn't even realise the gifts I'd been given, you know.
So it was, it seems to me that you had been developing a lot of coping skills throughout all of this period, a long period. It's over, like, when your mum died at 5, when you were 5. So that's a, 10-year period before you started to, get onto the grog, which then kind of escalated, I guess, and began to, like, replace those skills that you had, did they? I mean, what was the function of the alcohol? What was it doing?
I think the alcohol was a social lubricant, definitely. But I felt that I was very damaged. It's a terrible word, but that's what it felt like. And how could I be able to have a normal, healthy life given my family dynamics? The other part to it is that I'd started to withhold my affection, because if you loved or trusted or was fond of anything, it was taken away from you. And that was a really strong message that was sent to me early. So I started to withdraw and isolate. And I guess, that was evident mainly in my teens, where I was just like flotsam on the ocean, just like I'd been as a child, dragging through all the, drunk dens. I was living it, of my own making. So, yeah, I didn't think that I was ever going to live past 30. I didn't have any concept of having a happy life, because people like me, they weren't blessed with that. I hadn't had that experience, and I knew that it was for a reason. And I just thought, you know what? I'm just probably scum of 2 scums and the rest of the scums, and that's that. Yeah.
So when did you hit rock bottom? When did it get to the point where you said to yourself, I can't bear this anymore?
I hit rock bottom because, to my eternal shame, I found myself pregnant to an absolute loser who treated me exactly the same way that, I guess my father had treated me, and that was, like at arm's length. And that was to be, a really toxic relationship. But anyway, I did find myself pregnant, and I built on and learnt from my previous experiences. I just thought, I just don't want to be that kind of person. I'd lost all my other instincts, but I didn't lose my maternal. And my maternal instinct was that this child was not going to be subjected to shit like I'd been subjected to shit. I'm passionate about children because of this. So that was to be my rock bottom. I just thought, I just can't stand it. This is disgusting. I also had an intervention by Child Safety through my partner's sister. She was a nurse, and she had a gender, but at the end of the day, my daughter was removed for a very short time, and that was my rock bottom. Yeah, and the pain associated with that there was more than I could bear.
So then I guess you had some decisions to make. And what decisions did you make?
So the decisions that I made was that I would no longer do what I'd been doing, and that I was going to build my life up, and I was going to realise my potential. When you, as a woman, when you have a child, it's very different. It's a spiritual experience. You know, I know this doesn't happen for everyone, but it did happen for me, and other mothers that I've talked to agree. You actually look at that child and you go, oh my God, like I could never put my child through what I went through. You know, I'm responsible. You know, I had my first real responsibility, and I was not going to, you know, do what the others had done. So one of the major decisions I made was to break a cycle. I completely disconnected from my family and all their toxicity and went alone, went so alone. I had been breaking all those bonds in the meantime, but I thought there is no way. I'd rather my children don't know my family than be a part of it. So that was the first big thing. The second thing was looking at my then partner and going, no, I don't need this. I don't need to have another shackle. So I didn't actually have to do anything. He was always telling me I wasn't good enough. So I said, yeah, well, you just get yourself right out of here. And that happened. So that was really a very hard thing to do back then, because no one did that. No one, you know, I was unconventional. No one left their partner, you know. You're a single mother with a child. I mean, that was just frowned upon back then, but I didn't give a shit. I really didn't. I didn't give a hoot. So at the end of the day, they were two major decisions I made. But then the next decision that I made was to go to AA, and and little did I know what was actually there for me would be the best thing that ever happened in my life.
And how did that affect you going forward? So what kind of things did you learn there?
Oh, I learnt the most important thing. The most important thing that I got out of AA initially was that I wasn't alone. You know, there were other people who had, you know, mild anxiety and depressive episodes, and they were talking my language. I felt at home, and I decided to embark upon the program, you know, that's suggested as a program of recovery, and jumped in. And what I learnt was that it's a program of living, and I didn't have any framework like that, you know, so I was able to, you know, go through the steps and let go of things that had caused me pain, or things that I'd done that had caused me shame and guilt, and let go of some of the anger. You know, it's not easy growing up when things don't kind of work out just the way you would love to fantasize about. So I started to let go of things like that through the program, through working the steps of AA, and you know, the promises started to come to me, you know, like it's mentioned in the big book, you know, that I will have a really lovely life, and it will be useful, and, you know, I'll love it. And I thought, wow, you know, geez, you know, I'm just so ready for this. So initially the attraction lay in the fact that I could see immediately. There was no cooling down period. There was no, oh, let's have a look around and see what we can see. I just knew there was a truth about it, and it resonated with me. And it was true. I was able to start to put my life in some sort of order with the help of my higher power. You know, I couldn't have done it alone. And I think that's the big thing that I've learnt, is that, you know, I'm a human being, but I have a spirit in me, and you know, I never got told what this really is all about. And now that I can see that I'm all that, you know, I'm a lot older, I can actually see what it's all about now, and I see it very differently. It probably sounds a bit corny, but it was my human experience, and it wasn't easy, and that was it.
So, what do you think would be your biggest achievement so far? Now that you've got to where you've got to.
Biggest achievement? Geez, that's a great question, Steve. I think my biggest achievement today is it's hard to put in words, but I guess for me, my biggest achievement is acknowledging that this world, this life, this journey, it's a spiritual one, and the reconnection with my higher power is so amazing, and it keeps getting better, and I've come home. I am, so I've survived it. I guess that's the biggest achievement. I mean, I went to a psych, and she said to me, people like you just don't end up surviving things like you've had. It's just, I would have thought you would have died on the end of a needle. And you sort of take that on board, and you go, wow, that's, in a roundabout way, that's a really positive thing, isn't it? But yeah, I guess I've been very blessed. Spirit has blessed me with something that got me here, and I guess that's my greatest achievement, is acknowledging that this has not been me alone. And my fellow AA members, have enormous respect, and I love them, and they love me, and that's what it's all about, is we are the same. I've got people in my corner who are like me, and life couldn't be better. I think that would probably be my greatest achievement, yeah.
Listening back to Amy's story reminded me so much of my own. One of her lines really jumped out at me. It was when her psychologist said that people like you don't survive. I thought you would have ended up dying on the end of a needle. When I described my early life to a psychologist once, and she said, "I'm surprised that you survived. You could so easily have ended up in the gutter." So what can we take away from this story of early adversity, attachment disruption, alcoholism and recovery? Amy's early life was full of adverse experiences that impacted on her development. She was subjected to an adult world in which adults were untrustworthy, inconsistent, lacking in positive parenting skills, and where chaos reigned. Some of Amy's early experience included the death of a sibling, a sudden death in fact, unexplained, cot death, the death of her mother by suicide, at the age of 5 years. Geographical displacement, having an alcoholic father, being placed into the care of an alcoholic grandmother who then had a mental breakdown, being used by adults in custody battles, exposure to alcoholic drinking and being at risk of physical and sexual abuse. She picked up alcohol in early adolescence and began drinking alcoholically straight off. It was around this point that her grandfather made an attempt to sexually abuse her. She developed coping strategies that included making herself a small target, being hypervigilant and always planning for the worst. Her experiences with abusive and dysfunctional adults led Amy to her own suicide attempt. She was desperate and running out of ways to survive. This led her into foster care placements as a way of getting herself into a better environment. However, her life continued to be fraught with difficulties. One of the difficulties was born of an attempt to cope with a growing sense of self-loathing and powerlessness. She drank alcoholically. So what changed things around? She became pregnant, unplanned, and when her daughter was an infant, she was removed from Amy by Children's Services for a short period. This led to her rock bottom experience and an opportunity to make decisions to turn her life around. She decided to break the cycle. No, it's interesting that so many people that I've spoken to report that they have had to go to the very depths of despair in order to somehow experience a point where they are able to make a decision to either go on or to give up entirely. It seems that the rock bottom experience provides many people with this opportunity so that out of utter despair and chaos and a feeling of being completely disintegrated, one has the opportunity to reintegrate and to turn things around for the positive. She removed herself from her child and her child, she removed herself and her child from the toxic environment she was living in, and she became a member of the AA fellowship, in which she experienced a sense of identification with others' stories. She put the AA STEP program into her life and she learned to trust others. One of the most significant developments this period of her life gave her was the emergence of a deep spirituality which continues to carry her forward in life. She's employed in one of the helping professions. She's in a long-term stable marriage, has made a home for herself and her partner. She survived to thrive. It could have been all so very different for Amy. She's no longer marginalised and victimised. She's part of a community of mutual support, and she's able to serve her broader community in a lot of different ways. She is living well regardless. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and remember that if the content has caused you distress in any way, please reach out to the support services available in your country. In Australia, the number for Lifeline is 131114. That is 131114. And if you are in immediate danger, ring 000 and ask for the ambulance or police service. You can also contact Beyond Blue on 1300 22 46 36 for 24/7 support. And if you're struggling with alcohol or drug abuse, a good support service option is the Drug Info and Advice Line on 1300 85 85 84. Alcoholics Anonymous may be an appropriate way of getting support for yourself if alcohol is your problem or is one of the symptoms of problems in your life. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of people who come together to solve their drinking problem. It doesn't cost anything to attend AA meetings. There are no age or education requirements to participate. Membership is open to anyone who wants to do something about their drinking problem. And AA's primary purpose is to help alcoholics to achieve sobriety. You can find face-to-face and online meetings easily by going to the AA website, which is www.aa.org. Just a reminder that AA is not a religious organisation, but it does promote recovery through abstinence and living of the 12-step recovery program. All right, well, that's it for this episode. I hope you found it interesting and thought-provoking. I'll be back again with another episode in the near future where I'll be continuing my efforts to unpack this concept of living well regardless. So, hope to see you then. Bye for now.